Hey friends, so I wanted to add on a little bit to John's Dower Rights Explainer video, which was very good. I wanted to show you on web forms, on the contracts, what you should be looking for and what you need to fill out. So sharing my screen here already, we have our exclusive seller representation agreement, so your listing agreement on page 2, section number 7. We're all familiar with this as agents. And so these are the things to note. And just, I guess it's one of those things to reiterate, definitely read the contracts, know what's in the contract as you're getting your clients to sign for it. And it can have some real impacts on the transaction. So the first one here in Dower consent, the following questions must be answered if you are the only registered owner on the property. And so for our purposes, we're just looking for one individual on title. If there are 2 individuals, this section is not applicable. We don't put anything in here, even if they're married or they live in the property. We're not going to put yes, yes, if there are 2 names on title. And I'll explain that in a second. We see that often. So the first question is, are you legally married? So you could be separated but not legally married, and it does not include common law relationships. That's not an area that we as real estate agents deal with. And so for our purposes, are they legally married, yes or no? Check the box. Second question is, have either you or your spouse resided on the property at any time since your marriage? If the answer is yes, check off yes. Now, this is the important one here. If you answered both yes, your spouse, the non-titled spouse, will have to complete the Dower consent acknowledgement and sign this agreement in the signature section under non-titled spouse. This means that Dower rights apply. So that's your first most important thing on the listing end. When we pull up the exclusive representation agreement, Dower consent and acknowledgement. Now, don't get confused. This is not a waiver of their Dower rights. That would be done on title with a lawyer, okay? But again, what's important on this one that is required when listing the property, it reminds you it's only to be used when there is only one registered owner on the property, the owner is legally married, and the owner or the owner's spouse has resided on the property at any time since the marriage. When that is applicable, this form is to be signed by the spouse of the registered owner, so the non-titled spouse, and they must sign 4 documents. Number 1, the exclusive seller representation agreement, so your listing contract. This document, the exclusive seller representation agreement, Dower consent and acknowledgement. Number 3 is the purchase contract when that comes in. And at that time, they will sign the purchase contract, Dower consent and acknowledgement. There is an exception to this, is when they have released their Dower rights and that's registered on title. In that situation, there's no further dealings with the non-titled spouses. No signatures required in that situation. I think when you have that, probably bring that to the attention of reception so that they're not looking for it. They wouldn't normally know to look on title for those types of things. So you'll have to just acknowledge that. They may request the Dower consent. So just so you know, not required when released on title. Okay. Now, who can sign this? This can be signed by an authorized person, such as a lawyer, commissioner for oaths, or a notary public. And so, unfortunately, nobody within our brokerage can do so, as we have an interest in the non-titled spouse should be able to get legal advice or independent advice on before signing this. So that brings us to the purchase contract. And in the purchase contract, 7.1, I think this was added in 2017, I believe. So this is where Dower rights apply. And so the seller will have the non-titled spouse sign this contract and provide the completed Dower consent and acknowledgement form and the seller will put in an appropriate date on when they can provide that document. Now, this is pretty key. If there's a time in here, notice that if the seller fails to provide the completed Dower consent by the agreed upon date, the buyer may void this contract at the buyer's option by giving notice in writing. Now, the option, just like deposits, the option expires when the seller provides the Dower consent, even if that is past the date line. Okay, so hopefully that explains that a little bit more. And then just so that you can see it, this is the purchase contract, Dower consent and acknowledgement, reference the purchase contract, and then this is the one to be provided when you get an actual deal, so that the non-titled spouse is consenting to that purchase agreement, not just putting the property up for sale. So hopefully that explains that a little bit more for you. I know we don't come across this situation all of the time, sometimes even once a year maybe, so it's easy to kind of forget that, but there's some pretty large impacts to not following that, and we want to make sure that you guys are in compliance and protecting your clients and all parties in the transaction. Hopefully this helps. Have an amazing day.